Hey everyone. So today I would like to talk about this book, Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. So, who is the underground man, you may ask? What we know about him is that he is 40 years old and that he once worked as a civil servant. But after receiving a reasonably modest inheritance, he quit his job and exiled himself to a dark, cold apartment on the edge of St. Petersburg. He retreats into his underground and becomes altogether alienated and isolated from society. For many of us, this setting of mid 19th century Russia is rather unfamiliar to us. On the one hand, we feel as if we are strangers entering into another world. We are voyeurs struggling to get a glimpse of this strange place and its even stranger underground man. Well, the first thing one may recognize is that this character neither gives himself a name nor is a name given to him by other characters in the book. Other than being known as the Underground Man, he tries to give off the appearance of being separate from his world, of being in some sense anonymous, which is paradoxical considering that this entire book essentially brings us very deep into his mind. This whole text, to borrow the biblical sense of the word apocalypse, serves as a way for the underground man to reveal himself to us. We may approach him as a madman and believe that it is reprehensible to think like he does. We may cast him as alien to our settled notions of morality. But my goal today is to show you that this man we read about, this self described villain, bastard, egotist, and lazy idler, is no stranger to us at all. We know him very well because he is all of us. That is, a hyper conscious version of us. So I'd like to start with some wise words from the German novelist and poet Hermann Hesse, who wrote a number of essays on Dostoevsky. In his 1978 book, My Belief, Essays on Life and Art, he talks about how one is to go about reading a book like Notes from Underground and other works by Dostoevsky. The best time to read him, he says, is when we are miserable, when we have suffered to the limits of our capacity for suffering, and feel the entirety of life as a single wound, when we breathe despair and have died the death of hopelessness. He continues, staring afar into life, bereft and crippled by misery and no longer able to understand life in its wild, beautiful cruelty, wishing to have no more to do with it. Then we are open to the music of this terrifying and magnificent writer. Then we are no longer onlookers, no longer epicures and judges. We are fellow creatures among all the poor devils of Dostoevsky's creation. Then we suffer their woes, and we stare fascinated and breathless with them into the hurly-burly of life, into the eternally grinding mill of death. But at the same time, we can also catch Dostoevsky's music, his comfort, his love, and then we can first experience the marvelous meaning of his terrifying and so often hellish world. The underground man's hellish world can unsettle us. It can make us feel just as uncomfortable as how the underground man, a man who consciously avoids giving eye contact with people, feels when he first stares into Lisa's eyes. In the 6th chapter of part 2, he describes the experience. I saw two wide, open eyes examining me curiously and persistently. The look in those eyes was coldly indifferent, sullen, as if utterly alien. It oppressed me. Are we to feel alienated when our eyes are on the page and our mind's eye is fixed on the underground man, a seemingly elusive character who lives on the edge of town and whose sanity seems to be on the edge, verging on madness? I would say that this is one of the book's goals, to make us aware of our own alienation. The question then becomes, are we to see the underground man as someone who, like Lisa's eyes, are coldly indifferent? What kind of person is he? It must be remembered that we are experiencing the story from the point of view of the underground man. He is also writing about things and describing feelings he had nearly 16 years in the past, when he was 24 years old. We would be fooling ourselves if we take what he says and the events and people he describes as a totally objective portrayal of reality. It hardly is objective. This is not only a question of whether he correctly remembers what transpired in the past, but what is probably more important to consider is looking at how the way the underground man defines himself and how seeing himself a certain way colors, or maybe a better word is distorts his perception and shapes how he believes others see and judge him. At the very beginning of the second part, he says, as a consequence of my infinite vanity, and therefore of the high standard I set for myself, I very often looked at myself with a frenzied dissatisfaction, verging on loathing, and for that reason, in my own mind, I attributed my view to everyone else. He cannot be more clear when he says that, in my own mind, I attributed my view to everyone else. What view is this? He confesses that his vanity is his fatal flaw. Linda Williams, in her article, The Underground Man, A Question of Meaning, says that it is this flaw which makes him spiteful. And spite is not an insignificant thing to bring up here. The beginning of part 1 begins with the words, I am sick man, I am a spiteful man. Instead of spiteful, some editions may use the words evil or mean. But the Russian word uses zloy, which is probably best translated into English as malicious. His vanity therefore stems from a moral imperfection, a mean-spiritedness, a wickedness. Not only does his vanity make him spiteful, but he has other negative traits as well. He is shown to be repugnant, bitter, misanthropic, antisocial, envious, self-centered, obsessive, domineering, and cruel. He says, I can't live without domineering and tyrannizing someone. In chapter 3 of the second part, he talks about a dream he had of his school days and says that even with the only one friend he had, he was a tyrant at heart. He wanted to have unlimited power over his friend's soul. In addition, the underground man is shown to display masochistic and sadistic tendencies, an enjoyment of feeling pain and giving pain to others. One key example of wanting to indulge in an uncomfortable, painful situation is when he chooses to attend a dinner party. He essentially invites himself, and all his exchanges with the other characters are tainted with anger and hate. All these evil qualities of his stem from his vanity, on how he wishes to appear to others. When he refuses to quarrel with the officer in front of the tavern in Book 2, he says it was not because he was a coward, but because of his absolutely unlimited vanity. Getting beat up didn't bother him. What frustrated him was that everybody present there would laugh at him for using literary language. He here alludes to the literary French expression, the point d'honneur. Are we, as readers, to judge him badly? Are we to despise him for his flaws? We can do that. But I believe in doing so we may fail to understand him, and therefore fail to understand ourselves. The fact is that he is depressed and has trouble maintaining human relationships. Should we then have sympathy for him? Should we pity him? Maybe we are not able to forgive him for his cruelty in the way he treats others. But it is difficult not to be curious about why he is the way he is. Though cruel, he is also intelligent, honest, and a highly reflective person. But even his apparently good qualities, such as a love for reading, turn against him. For example, he sees engaging with the officer as a literary battle. Violence, in a sense, becomes aestheticized and influenced by the romantic literature he reads. When he is with Eliza, after his long moralizing speech, she tells him that he talks as if he was reading from a book. The underground man is conscious of this. He remarks, I knew I'd been speaking stiffly, artificially, even bookishly. In short, I didn't know how to speak except like a book. Not only that, but he is very conscious of things. But maybe this ultra-consciousness is in itself a flaw, an impediment to action. His mood and opinion clearly express a state of flux, contradicting itself. He moves from one extreme to another, from feeling superior to others and vindictive to feeling worthless and feeling a deep desire to crawl in his corner and take pleasure in his despair of the next moment. We may point at him and say that he is a despicable creature, but how many of us have not felt like he does, or thought his thoughts at some point in our lives? What shocks us about this text is not so much the message it sends, but the brutal honesty of the man sending it. He feels unbearably oppressed by Lisa's presence. He says, I wanted her to disappear. Peace was what I desired. I desired to be left alone in the underground, because I was unaccustomed to it. Living life oppressed me to the point where I had trouble breathing. This quality of solitude, a feeling separate from others, of being alienated, not only defines the underground man, it is part of the human condition. In the 10th chapter, part 2, he says that all of us are divorced from life. All of us limp along, some more, some less. We're so divorced from it that we sometimes feel a sort of revulsion to real living life, and therefore can't bear to be reminded of it. The underground man, therefore, does not think he is that different from other people. He is just more conscious and strong-willed, if not honest to himself about himself. Speaking to readers who may criticize him or for including every human being in his wretched underground, he affirms that, quote, I have only carried to the extreme what you haven't dared to carry even halfway. And what's more, you've mistaken your cowardice for good sense, and thus have found comfort in deceiving yourselves. To be human, then, is to be estranged. It is to be alienated. Estrangement implies a disunity among human beings. The question then becomes, are we estranged in our essence, or does our estrangement come about in society through living with other people? A further question is, how do we overcome our alienation? Is it through literature, through politics, through philosophy, or through religion? After being arrested in 1849, Dostoyevsky passionately remarked that society cannot exist without literature, insofar that literature serves as the mirror of society. But what about those individuals in society reading Dostoyevsky's work? Is Dostoyevsky merely telling everyone that life is meaningless and that we are all prisoners of our alienation? If life is meaningless, then what does this have to say about our morality? The fact is that the original manuscript of Notes from Underground did not survive. Censors intervened in the 10th section of Part 2. As a consequence of this, Dostoyevsky angrily wrote to his brother, the misprints are terrible, and it would have been better not to print the penultimate chapter at all than to print it as it is, with forced phrases and contradicting itself. What can you do? The censors are pigs. Wherever I ridiculed everything and at times blasphemed for show, that was let by. But where I derived from this the need for faith in Christ, that was prohibited. Are they, the censors, in a plot against the government or something? From these words we can deduce that the original text likely had a more Christian message to it. Would we then need God for there to be morality, and as a way for alleviating our alienation? And here I feel inclined to quote one of Dostoevsky's most famous aphorisms from his book, The Brothers Karamazov, when he says, if there is no God, then everything is permitted. Right, thank you for watching, and hope you enjoy my future videos.